April 1st, 1945. Over 180,000 American troops storm the beaches of Okinawa, expecting a fight to the death, only to find an eerie silence. At their backs, 300 warships anchor hope for a quick victory. Ahead, 100,000 Japanese defenders vanish into the island's hills, while 435,000 civilians brace for an ordeal they can't escape. The Battle of Okinawa promises a launchpad to defeat Japan, but beneath this calm hides Yahara's deadly trap, a plan that will turn the island into the bloodiest battlefield of the Pacific. The question is, how did this opening quiet lead to such catastrophic consequences? Okinawa sits just 340 miles from the Japanese home islands, a narrow, windswept strip of land that holds the key to the end of the Pacific War. For American planners, this island is more than a target on a map. It's the last major obstacle before the planned invasion of Japan itself. The stakes are clear. Whoever controls Okinawa controls the airfields and anchorages needed to strike at Kyushu, to cut Japan off from its lifelines, and to bring overwhelming firepower within reach of Tokyo. The geography of Okinawa shapes every decision. The north is a tangle of hills and dense forest, hard to cross but thinly defended. The south is different, ridges of coral and limestone, honeycombed with caves, running east to west like the bones of a clenched fist. Here, the Japanese have spent months preparing a labyrinth of defenses, turning every hill into a fortress. In between these lines, more than 435,000 Okinawan civilians remain, families, farmers, children, trapped in the crossfire, their fate tied to the outcome of the battle. On the American side, the 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr. brings together 100,000 Army troops and 88,000 Marines, backed by 300 warships and over 1,000 support vessels. Admiral Raymond Spruance commands the 5th Fleet offshore, while Admiral Mark Mitcher's carrier task force controls the skies. This is the largest amphibious force ever assembled in the Pacific. Every division, every ship, every plane is committed to seizing Okinawa as the launchpad for the final assault on Japan. Facing them, the Japanese 32nd Army, led by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, holds about 100,000 defenders, regulars, naval personnel, and thousands of Okinawan conscripts. Ushijima's staff is divided. Major General Isamu Cho urges bold counterattacks and the glory of decisive battle. But Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the operations officer, sees the reality. With no hope of reinforcement and only a trickle of supplies, Yahara argues for a war of attrition, trading ground for time, luring the Americans into the southern ridges and caves where firepower counts for less and casualties mount. For the island's civilians, the choices are few. Japanese propaganda warns of American brutality, urging death over surrender. Many are pressed into labor, building defenses or carrying supplies. Others are caught between armies, unsure whom to trust and unable to flee. In the coming weeks, Okinawa's fields and villages will become a battlefield unlike any the Pacific has seen. As the Americans secure their beachhead and push inland, the calm of the first days will give way to the grinding reality of Yahara's plan, a deliberate, calculated defense that will turn Okinawa into a test of endurance and will. Both sides know what's at stake. For the Americans, it's the path to victory. For the Japanese, it's the last chance to bleed their enemy and perhaps force a different end to the war. For the Okinawan people, it's a struggle to survive as their homeland becomes the crucible of the Pacific. At 8:30 on the morning of April 1st, 1945, 2 Army and 2 Marine divisions surge onto Okinawa's Hagushi beaches, stretching for nearly 13 kilometers along the island's west coast. The surf is thick with landing craft, and 50,000 men hit the sand in the opening waves. But the only sounds are distant shell fire and the low thrum of engines. No machine guns, no organized resistance. The first American troops ashore meet nothing but silence and the scattered debris of abandoned Japanese outposts. Officers scan the tree line, expecting the ambush that never comes. By noon, the beachhead is secure. Combat engineers mark lanes through the sand, and tanks roll forward without opposition. Buckner's staff, bracing for disaster, instead finds the day's casualty list almost empty. Just 55 killed or missing out of tens of thousands ashore. It's the lightest landing of the entire Pacific War. Rumors spread that the Japanese have withdrawn into the hills, or that mass counterattacks will come at dusk. But hour after hour, the quiet holds. American units waste no time. The 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions pivot south, their orders clear. Cut the island in half and drive toward Naha. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions head north, fanning out toward the Motobu Peninsula. By the end of the day, both Kadena and Yontan airfields, prime objectives for the invasion, are in American hands, their runways already marked for engineers and supply teams. Within 24 hours, the 10th Army has seized more ground than planners thought possible in a week. The beachhead is nearly 5 miles deep, and the island is almost split. General Buckner surveys the map that evening, noting the speed of the advance. Some staff officers joke that the enemy must have fled into the sea. But others, more cautious, remember the warnings from intelligence. The Japanese have not vanished. They are waiting, dug deep in the southern ridges, watching every move. Colonel Yahara's plan is working. The Americans are being drawn inland, away from the beaches, and into a killing ground, shaped by months of preparation. For now, though, the mood in the American camps is almost buoyant. The first day's reports are full of optimism. Supplies pour ashore, tanks and artillery roll forward, and the airfields buzz with activity. The sense of relief is palpable. But just beyond the new front lines, the hills of southern Okinawa remain quiet, too quiet for comfort. The Americans have landed with barely a scratch. The real battle still lies ahead, hidden behind that deceptive calm. On April 8th, the American drive south slams into the outer Shuri defenses at Kakazu Ridge, a tangle of coral hills and deep ravines that the Japanese have spent months turning into a fortress. Infantry from the 96th Division advance under grey skies, expecting another push through thin resistance. Instead, they find every approach covered by overlapping fields of fire. Japanese soldiers remain invisible until the last moment, firing from cave mouths and firing slits cut into the reverse slopes. Artillery and mortar shells detonate harmlessly above empty ground, while the real defenders wait behind thick layers of rock and earth. Each attempt to take the ridge meets the same fate. American platoons climb the forward slope, only to be pinned by machine guns and grenades hurled from unseen hands. When the infantry dig in, Japanese troops emerge at night, crawling through gullies and brush to launch counterattacks at close range. The caves run deep, some with multiple exits, some linked by tunnels that let defenders shift positions faster than the attackers can react. For nearly 2 weeks, the battle at Kakuzu grinds into a stalemate. The 96th Division tries flanking attacks, then frontal assaults, but every gain is lost to a sudden counterattack or a hidden sniper. Tanks bog down in the ravines or are picked off by well-placed anti-tank guns. The coral ridges, honeycombed with tunnels, seem to swallow every shell and bomb. Even flamethrowers struggle to reach defenders buried deep in the rock. By April the 12th, the 7th Division relieves the exhausted 96th, but the pattern repeats. American artillery fires over 19,000 rounds in a single day. Yet the Japanese hold. The defenders, mostly from the 22nd and 23rd Infantry Regiments, lose men in droves, but their positions remain intact. For every 450 American casualties at Kakuzu, Japanese losses climb above 5,700, yet they refuse to yield. Reports from the front describe a battle fought in darkness and confusion. Soldiers move from shell hole to shell hole, never sure if the next step will bring a bullet or a grenade. Medics risk their lives to reach the wounded, only to be targeted by snipers who know the terrain better than any map. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and rotting vegetation. Rain turns the coral dust to mud, making every movement a struggle. After 13 days of fighting, Kakuzu Ridge stands as a monument to the effectiveness of Japanese cave defense. American commanders realize that firepower alone will not break the Shuri line. The infantry dig in, battered and frustrated, as engineers and assault teams begin searching for new ways to root out defenders hidden in the rock. The battle for Okinawa has entered a new phase, one measured not in miles, but in yards, gained at terrible cost. Just after American troops hit the beaches and began pushing inland, a new battle erupts offshore, one that will test nerves and shatter ships. On April 6, 1945, the Japanese launch Kikusui, their first mass kamikaze offensive against the Allied fleet around Okinawa. More than 350 suicide planes, joined by hundreds of conventional bombers, take off from Kyushu and Formosa. Their target, the thin line of destroyers and support craft stretched across the sea as radar pickets, the early warning shield for the invasion force. The first ships to face the onslaught are isolated, exposed, and far from help. At 12:26 p.m., the destroyer Hainsworth is hit, the opening blow in a 19-hour assault. Hours later, USS Bush, stationed at Radar Picket 1, takes 3 separate kamikaze strikes, one after another, each more devastating than the last. Fires rage below deck, ammunition cooks off, and the order to abandon ship comes as the hull breaks apart. 87 crew members are lost. Nearby, USS Colquhoun is overwhelmed by 4 suicide planes in quick succession, leaving 35 dead or missing. The high-speed minesweeper Emmons suffers 5 hits in 2 minutes. Its decks a storm of fire and twisted metal. 60 men die before the ship is scuttled to prevent capture. By dawn on April the 7th, 3 destroyers, Bush, Colhoun, and Emmons, have been sunk. USS Newcomb, struck by 4 kamikazes, is left a burning wreck but remains afloat. 20 other ships are damaged in a single day. The radar picket line, designed to give warning, has become a killing ground. Sailors fight fires, rescue survivors, and brace for more waves. The cost is staggering. Hundreds dead, dozens of ships crippled, and the sea littered with oil and debris. The kamikaze pilots press their attacks with relentless precision. Some dive straight into the bridge or engine rooms. Others aim for anti-aircraft mounts. The impact is immediate. Explosions rip through steel decks, flames shoot skyward, and crews scramble to save the wounded. On the horizon, American fighters intercept as many attackers as they can, but sheer numbers overwhelm the defenses. Combat air patrols shoot down dozens. Shipboard gunners account for more, yet nearly 180 suicide planes break through in the first Kikusui alone. While the fleet reels from the air assault, another threat emerges from the south. The battleship Yamato, pride of the Imperial Navy, sails on a one-way mission with 9 escorts. Spotted by American submarines and trailed by carrier aircraft, Yamato never reaches Okinawa. On April 7th, waves of American planes descend. Torpedoes strike her port side, bombs detonate on her decks, and fires spread below. At 2:23 p.m., Yamato erupts in a massive explosion, sending a mushroom cloud thousands of feet into the air. Nearly 3,000 Japanese sailors die with her. The last hope of a surface breakthrough vanishes beneath the waves. By the end of the first week, the sea off Okinawa is a graveyard. Destroyers sunk, decks scorched, and the air thick with smoke. The kamikaze campaign has only begun, but already the cost to the U.S. Navy is the highest since Pearl Harbor. For the men on the picket line, every day brings the same question. Will they see another dawn? Or will the next shadow on the radar be their last? On May 1st, the assault on Hacksaw Ridge begins with the 307th and 305th Infantry Regiments facing a wall of machine gun fire and mortars from hidden Japanese caves. The Maida escarpment rises almost sheer in places, with the summit honeycombed by tunnels and firing slits. American artillery pounds the crest, but the defenders remain out of sight, shielded by layers of coral and earth. Each advance up the slope brings a cascade of grenades and the sudden crack of rifles from unseen positions. Every yard gained is paid for in blood. Corporal Desmond Doss, a medic with the 307th, moves among the wounded without a weapon, carrying only his aid kit and his faith. Again and again, he crawls into the open under fire, dragging men back to the cliff's edge. He lowers them down the escarpment with ropes, praying for the strength to save just one more. Over 5 days, from May 1st to May 6th, Doss rescues 75 men, working through the night as bullets snap overhead. The Medal of Honor citation will later credit him with saving lives others had written off as lost. The fighting on Hacksaw is relentless. Eugene Sledge, serving with the 1st Marine Division nearby. Rites of the chaos, shells churning the earth, bodies tangled in the mud, the air thick with the stench of death. The Japanese defenders, many from the 24th Division, counterattack at night, slipping through the shattered lines to hurl satchel charges and grenades. American units dig in wherever they can, exhausted and short of water, waiting for dawn to bring another assault. By May 6th, the Americans finally secure the crest. The cost is staggering, hundreds killed and wounded, entire companies reduced to scattered survivors. The Japanese defenders leave behind only silence and the empty mouths of caves, each one cleared by flamethrowers and satchel charges. Hacksaw Ridge stands as a symbol of the human cost of Okinawa. Courage and sacrifice measured in inches, not miles. The Shuri line is breached, but the hardest fighting still lies ahead. Sugarloaf Hill rises barely 50 feet above the battered ground west of Shuri. But for the Marines of the 6th Division, it becomes the most lethal patch of earth on Okinawa. Between May 12th and May 18th, 3 Marine regiments are fed into the fight, each one ground down by machine gun fire, mortars, and the relentless tactics of Colonel Mita's 15th Independent Mixed Regiment. Every assault up Sugarloaf's bare slopes is met by defenders firing from concrete-reinforced caves cut into the reverse side. The hill is only the visible tip of a defensive triangle, anchored by Half Moon and Horseshoe Hills, each one able to pour flanking fire onto the others. Marines take the crest by day, only to be driven off by counterattacks at night. The ground is so deadly that some companies lose half their men in a single afternoon. To break the deadlock, the 713th Armored Flamethrower Battalion brings up its new H-1 Sherman Zippo tanks. Each carries 290 gallons of napalm, able to project fire 80 yards into cave mouths. Infantry and tank crews work in teams. Marines mark cave positions with smoke. Then the tanks advance, hosing the entrances with liquid fire. The effect is immediate and brutal. The caves erupt in flame, defenders suffocate or flee, and the Marines move in behind the fire. Over the course of the battle, the 713th tanks will burn through more than 76,000 gallons of napalm on Okinawa, killing thousands of Japanese defenders at a cost of just 8 tank crewmen killed. But every advance is paid for in blood. The 6th Division suffers over 3,000 casualties at Sugarloaf alone. On May 18th, Dog Company of the 29th Marines, backed by tanks, finally manages a coordinated assault. The tanks slip through a gap to the south, catching Japanese defenders as they emerge for another counterattack. Machine guns and flame cut them down before they can regroup. By dusk, Marines hold the summit for good. The hill is little more than a churned mass of mud and bodies, its slopes littered with the dead of both armies. The price for this single feature is staggering, but the fall of Sugarloaf cracks open the western flank of the Shuri line. Eastward, the 96th Infantry Division faces its own ordeal at Conical Hill, where flamethrower tanks again become the only answer to caves that swallow shell and shrapnel alike. Here too, progress is measured in yards, and every yard is earned with fire and loss. The defenders are depleted, their positions collapsing under the combined weight of flame, explosives, and exhaustion. But the cost for the attackers is written in casualty logs. Hundreds dead, thousands wounded, and no end yet in sight. On the night of May 4th, Japanese headquarters south of Shuri buzzes with tension. General Isamu Cho, restless and impatient with the slow grind of attrition, pushes for one last all-out counterattack. For weeks, Colonel Hiromichi Yahara has warned against these tactics, arguing that every man lost in open assault cannot be replaced. But Cho, convinced that only a bold strike can turn the tide, persuades General Ushijima to gamble their remaining reserves. Orders go out to the 24th Division and supporting units. Prepare to attack under cover of darkness, break through American lines, and drive toward the coast. As the assault begins, nearly 3,000 Japanese troops emerge from concealed positions, moving through rain-soaked gullies and battered fields. Artillery opens up, flares arc over the lines, and American outposts along the Maida escarpment report movement everywhere at once. The Japanese charge into machine gun fire, mortars, and pre-sighted artillery. Some reach American positions, fighting hand-to-hand in the mud, but most are cut down before they can close. By dawn, the ground is littered with the dead. Entire companies vanish in the darkness. The 24th Division, once the Army's best, is shattered. In a single night, the 32nd Army loses thousands. Veteran infantry, artillery crews, and irreplaceable officers. American casualties are heavy, but the Japanese reserves are gone. Cho, seeing the results, falls silent. Yahara's warnings have come true. From this point, no further counterattacks are possible. Ushijima and his staff now face the reality that only defensive fighting remains. The last offensive gamble has failed. The Shuri line, battered and thin, will have to hold with what's left. The battle for Okinawa enters its final, desperate phase. Rain begins falling on May the 21st, and within hours the battlefield dissolves into a world of mud and misery. Water pours down the hillsides, pooling in every shell hole, flooding the ravines, and turning supply roads into rivers of muck. Infantrymen, already exhausted from weeks of combat, now slog through knee-deep sludge that clings to boots and weighs down every step. Rifles jam with grit, rations turn to paste, and the wounded wait longer for help as stretchers sink into the mire. The rain does not let up. For days, the only sounds are the steady drumming on helmets and the squelch of boots in the mud. Foxholes fill with water, forcing men to sleep, sitting up, their backs pressed to the slick walls, ponchos pulled tight against the cold. Field diaries from the 1st Marine Division describe the stench of rot and decay, bodies half submerged, weapons rusting in the open. One Marine writes, "The mud is everywhere. It covers you, your gear, your soul. You can't get warm, you can't get dry. You just keep moving." Tanks and trucks, once the backbone of the advance, become liabilities. Tracks spin uselessly, engines drown, and vehicles are abandoned where they stall. The new H-1 Sherman flamethrower tanks, called Zippos by the troops, are pressed into action, their crews fighting not just the enemy, but the elements. But in this weather, even the most powerful machines bog down. Engineers lay down steel mats and corduroy roads, but the rain defeats every attempt at order. The front lines blur as units lose contact, radios short out, and maps dissolve in the wet. For the Japanese defenders, the rain is both curse and shield. Artillery shells bury themselves harmlessly in the mud, and cave entrances disappear behind sheets of water. But the misery is universal. Defenders and attackers alike huddle in flooded tunnels, sleep in shifts, and ration their last dry cigarettes. The battle slows to a crawl. The hills around Shuri, once the heart of the Japanese line, begin to crumble. Trenches collapse, ammunition spoils, and the defenders, cut off from supplies, grow weaker with each passing day. By the end of May, the men fighting on Okinawa are nearly spent. The mud, more than any weapon, grinds down the armies. Movement becomes agony, wounds fester, and tempers fray in the ceaseless damp. In this world of rain and rot, survival depends on endurance as much as courage. The struggle for Okinawa has become a test not just of tactics or firepower, but of the human will to keep going when everything else has failed. On May the 29th, Shuri Castle falls. The 1st Marine Division enters the battered ruins after weeks of relentless fighting, moving through shattered stone walls and burned-out tunnels. For months, Shuri had anchored the Japanese defense, a fortress above ground, a labyrinth beneath. Now, the defenses lie broken. The last defenders slip away under cover of darkness and rain, leaving behind abandoned guns and the stench of spent explosives. American assault units push through what's left of the ancient corridors, marking the first time in the campaign that the heart of the Shuri line is in American hands. The stars and stripes rise over the castle's highest point. Across the island, the sound of artillery shifts south as Japanese units pull back to their final positions along the Kian Peninsula. After-action reports describe caves littered with bodies, weapons stacked in corners, and command posts hastily abandoned. The ground is churned to mud, records and maps left behind in the rush to escape. General Ushijima and his staff receive the news in their underground headquarters. With the main line breached and reserves spent, he orders a general withdrawal. The battered remnants of the 32nd Army slip away through rain-soaked ravines and flooded trenches, carrying what little ammunition remains. Officers burn documents and destroy radios, erasing any trace that might fall into enemy hands. The retreat is chaotic, with units fragmented and many wounded left behind. American commanders signal the collapse of organized resistance in the central sector. The capture of Shuri cracks open the southern front, exposing the last Japanese positions to direct assault. For the men who fought up the ridges and through the mud, the victory is both decisive and grim. The cost is counted in casualty lists that stretch for pages, and in the silence that settles over the castle's ruined halls. South of Shuri, the final pocket of resistance braces for the end. The battle's last act is about to begin. On Okinawa, war shatters every boundary between civilians and combatants. Japanese military leaders, convinced that death is preferable to capture, flood the island with propaganda. Families hear that Americans will torture and kill without mercy. In the villages, soldiers hand out grenades and poison, instructing parents to use them on their children and themselves if the Americans approach. On Tokashiki Island, 329 bodies are counted in a valley after a single day of mass suicide. Parents gather their families in caves pull grenade pins, and embrace. Survivors recall the silence that follows, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the cries of children left alive by faulty explosives. The terror spreads to the main island. Japanese officers order civilians from their shelters to fetch water or supplies, knowing many will be caught in the crossfire. Others are pressed into labor, building fortifications or carrying ammunition under fire. Schoolchildren, some as young as 14, are mobilized into the Iron and Blood Imperial Corps and the Himeyuri Student Nurse Corps. Boys are sent to the front with bamboo spears or satchel charges, told to attack tanks or act as runners. Girls work in field hospitals carved into the rock, tending to the wounded without medicine, burying the dead, and sometimes dying alongside them. Of the 222 Himeyuri students and 18 teachers, only a handful survive. Many, cornered in caves as the lines collapse, choose suicide over surrender. Some with grenades, others with poison, others by leaping from cliffs. The scale of loss is almost unimaginable. By the time the fighting ends, at least 80,000 Okinawan civilians are dead, killed by bombs, bullets, starvation, disease, and by their own hands. Whole families vanish in a single night. The fields and caves of Okinawa become graves for a generation. In the chaos, the line between soldier and civilian dissolves, leaving only the memory of a people caught in the machinery of total war. On June 18th, as fighting raged along the southern ridges, Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. moved forward to observe the Marine advance near Ibaru Ridge. He wore a standard helmet, having just replaced his 3-star version after a warning from nearby Marines. At 12:55 p.m., a Japanese artillery shell struck a coral outcrop close by, sending fragments into Buckner's chest. Medics rushed him to a field aid station, but the wound proved fatal. Buckner became the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire during World War II, just days before the battle's end. His death left a gap at the top of the 10th Army, with Marine General Roy Geiger taking command for the final days. In the Japanese command cave, the end was clear. General Mitsuru Ushijima and his chief of staff, General Isamu Cho, prepared for their last act. On the evening of June 22nd, they held a quiet farewell, sharing sake and a final meal with their remaining staff. Ushijima ordered Colonel Hiromichi Yahara to survive, telling him, "Bear witness." Just after midnight, Ushijima and Cho knelt facing east, drew their swords, and committed seppuku. Their deaths followed the ancient code of the samurai, refusing capture as their army collapsed around them. Yahara, following orders, left the cave to surrender and later recounted the scene. The generals' bodies draped in white, the cave silent except for the distant sound of American artillery. The loss of Buckner, Ushijima, and Cho within days marked the end of organized battle on Okinawa. For both armies, leadership had come at the highest price. The final toll would be counted not just in soldiers, but in the names of commanders who fell with their men. By the summer of 1945, Okinawa had become a warning. The final casualty reports told the story in numbers too large to ignore. 49,151 American casualties, including more than 12,500 dead or missing. The Japanese losses were even higher, with over 110,000 soldiers killed and barely 7,000 taken prisoner. Among Okinawan civilians, at least 80,000 perished, many by suicide or starvation. The ground had been won, but at a cost that stunned even the most hardened commanders. In Washington, these figures landed on the desks of President Truman and his advisors. Military planners began to calculate what an invasion of the Japanese home islands might demand. They called it the Okinawa rate. Using the battle's casualty ratio as a baseline, the Joint Chiefs estimated that Operation Downfall, the invasion of Kyushu and Honshu, could cost between 500,000 and 1 million American casualties. Some projections ran even higher, with up to 4 million total casualties on both sides, including hundreds of thousands of American dead. The sheer scale of the fighting on Okinawa shaped every discussion about how to end the war. The number of Purple Hearts ordered, 500,000, spoke volumes about what leaders expected if the fighting continued. For Truman and his cabinet, every page of the casualty reports was a stark reminder. If the Japanese fought for their homeland as they had for Okinawa, the cost would be measured not just in soldiers, but in the future of entire generations. The shadow of these numbers fell across every meeting in the White House that summer, narrowing the options as the war's final decisions drew close. By June 1945, the Battle of Okinawa had cost over 49,000 American casualties, at least 100,000 Japanese military dead, and up to 140,000 Okinawan civilians lost. Numbers drawn from both U.S. Army records and post-war Japanese investigations. The fighting revealed the devastating effectiveness of defense-in-depth tactics, the grim toll of kamikaze attacks at sea, and the tragic fate of civilians caught between propaganda and combat. The casualty rates recorded on Okinawa directly influenced U.S. planners, who projected up to 1 million casualties for a mainland invasion, an estimate cited in the records of Operation Downfall and referenced in discussions that led to the use of atomic weapons. Today, Okinawa stands as a documented reminder of the war's human cost and the decisions shaped by those final, brutal months.